Prince Andrew never really leaves the news, but there's been a sort of tsunami of coverage over the last couple of weeks.
He's living in disgrace. He was stripped of his royal duties, and part of that is he's not really being paid by the monarchy anymore because he doesn't complete any royal duties.
This is a prince who had, until all this stuff happened, he was decorated for his military career.
The affairs of the royal family tells you that we are living in quite bizarre times.
And this is largely due to leaked emails that have come from Ghislaine Maxwell.
The newest wave of testimony about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has arrived, and it's louder, sharper, and more revealing than anything heard in recent months. This time, the words come from someone who moved within royal social circles for years. Not a disgruntled staff member seeking revenge, not a tabloid opportunist looking for headlines, but a figure who understood exactly how the family operated and what behaviour crossed acceptable lines. Susanna Constantine, a woman synonymous with British media culture and a long-time presence in upper-class society, has delivered one of the most unfiltered assessments of Andrew to date. Appearing on a podcast that rarely provokes serious controversy, she dropped statements that hit Buckingham Palace like a thunderclap. Ignorant, entitled, convinced the world owed him something. And according to insiders contacted after the episode aired, these remarks were less a shocking revelation and more a confirmation of what people already knew. One former courtier stated that people inside the institution heard those words and thought immediately, yes, that tracks perfectly. Another insider went further, describing the reaction inside royal circles as a collective nod rather than genuine shock. But what makes Constantine's testimony so genuinely potent is not merely what she said, but the manner in which she delivered it. There was no hesitation, no softening at the edges, no polite caveats that usually shield royal figures from direct public criticism. She described Andrew as the outlier in a family internationally known for restraint and composure. Where others displayed measured behaviour, she said he displayed volatility. Where others showed natural courtesy, he reacted with visible irritation. She recalled moments where minor inconveniences triggered bursts of anger, the kind that made bystanders instinctively step back. And according to several people contacted after reviewing her account, these were absolutely not isolated lapses in judgment. They represented part of a long-standing behavioral pattern. Her claims have now reignited broader questions that observers have asked for years. How does someone raised in the same privileged environment as his siblings develop such unchecked entitlement? Why did no one intervene earlier when warning signs were visible? And how did this behavior become normalized enough that multiple people across different decades described essentially the same character traits, almost word for word? Those questions are now circulating again with renewed urgency, particularly among observers who believe Andrew's downfall did not begin with scandal, but with fundamental character issues that were never properly addressed. The atmosphere around her testimony also carries a deeper implication, one that royal commentators have hinted at for years. Being born the spare, especially in a system built entirely on hierarchy and succession, can morph into a lifelong identity crisis. Constantine herself speculated that immense privilege without meaningful purpose is a genuinely dangerous psychological cocktail. And experts echo that assessment, noting that the combination of constant deference, minimal accountability, and an inherited platform can produce someone who never fully learns personal limits. One palace insider summarized the dynamic bluntly. When no one tells a prince he's wrong, he grows up assuming he's always right. That assessment resonates even more strongly when weighed against other accounts that have surfaced over the years. Former staff members have spoken publicly about sudden temper outbursts, inexplicable rudeness, and expectations that every room, every person, every interaction should automatically bend to accommodate him. These recollections align perfectly with the portrait Constantine has drawn, but her position, close enough to observe directly, distant enough to speak freely without institutional constraints, adds a significant new layer of credibility. The warnings about Andrew's character did not begin in recent years, and they certainly did not begin with scandal. Long before Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor became a global headline, there were quiet murmurs, private observations, uneasy glances, subtle red flags noted by people who crossed his path during earlier decades. And among the earliest and perhaps most striking warnings came from a woman who encountered him in the early 1980s, long before the public learned to view him through a critical lens. Her name was Vicky Hodge, an actress and model known in British social circles, someone worldly, self-assured, and experienced enough to recognize troublesome behavior when she encountered it. Her account, resurfacing through biographers and insiders, reads today like an eerily accurate blueprint for everything that would follow. And what's remarkable is not the drama of her memories, but the uncomfortable accuracy of her observations. She met Andrew in Barbados during a period when he was still publicly seen as the charming, carefree young royal, the handsome naval officer, the confident joker, the prince who seemingly could do no wrong in public perception. But according to her, the veneer cracked almost immediately upon actual interaction. She described a young man who dominated conversations with jokes that were neither clever nor genuinely amusing, yet delivered with a self-satisfaction that suggested he expected applause regardless. Witnesses say he often spoke not to genuinely connect with others, but to perform, like someone addicted to the sound of his own voice. Hodge recalled finding him the next day swimming in the sea without any clothing, reveling in the attention it generated. One insider, who later reviewed her account, stated she was witnessing in real time the beginnings of a personality that thrived on pushing boundaries simply for the thrill of reaction. Their brief romance lasted around 10 days, intense, erratic, and marked by displays of immaturity that, in her view, signaled deeper psychological issues. He professed his affection quickly, almost impulsively, and then vanished just as fast when he returned to his naval duties. No explanation, no courtesy, no follow-up communication. The abruptness became one of the first documented examples of his pattern. Intense charm, followed by emotional vacancy, all framed by the unspoken expectation that he would not be questioned about his behavior. Weeks later, she shared her impressions with a newspaper, and the quote that stands out today reads almost prophetic. She warned explicitly that Andrew was headstrong, dismissive of advice, and likely to stumble into situations that could embarrass both himself and the royal family, unless someone strong enough stepped in to correct course. At the time, these remarks were treated as colorful commentary from a brief romantic encounter. Now insiders admit they sound uncomfortably familiar and disturbingly accurate. Her observations also revealed something else crucial, a sense of entitlement so deeply ingrained that it was visible even during leisure activities. He seemed to genuinely believe rules did not apply to him, that social conventions were for others to follow, and that consequences were abstract concepts reserved for ordinary people. And according to people who later worked with him professionally, the young man Hodge described was essentially the same man they encountered decades afterward, still convinced of his charm, still indifferent to boundaries, still expecting the world to automatically adapt to him. When the early warnings faded into the background and Andrew stepped fully into the social orbit available to a young royal, the behavior that once appeared merely immature began taking on a sharper, more genuinely unsettling edge. Former staff members, guests, and insiders say this was the period when he truly became the so-called party prince, a title the public once used jokingly, but which behind the scenes carried an entirely different, darker meaning. Those who attended private gatherings in the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s recall a man who treated each room as a personal stage for performance. According to multiple sources, Andrew thrived on being the absolute focal point, even if it meant crossing social boundaries that left others uncomfortable. One guest described a moment when he crept up behind a woman and casually unzipped her dress, treating it as a party trick rather than recognizing it as an invasion of personal space. Another recalled him shoving a young attendee's face into a plate of food, laughing as if humiliation were the entire purpose of the evening's entertainment. And while these accounts vary in specific detail, the tone is remarkably consistent across sources. These were not accidental mishaps. They were deliberate routines. A former attendee who spoke on condition of anonymity said he behaved like someone who couldn't imagine the word no applying to him personally. She added that younger women were often deliberately placed near him at events, not by random accident, but because staff had learned he was more agreeable when he felt admired and validated. It became, according to her, an unspoken management strategy employed by staff, a way to keep the evening atmosphere calm and prevent outbursts. That remark alone has sent shockwaves through royal observers who now view these stories through the lens of what later publicly unfolded. There were also the jokes, crude, persistent, and often directed at those least willing or able to challenge him due to social position. One insider described the humor as juvenile, with a thick layer of entitlement, the kind that made people laugh politely out of social obligation rather than genuine amusement. And when someone didn't laugh appropriately, according to several witnesses, that's when the mood would snap abruptly. A small inconvenience, a delayed drink, a minor misstep in protocol, virtually anything could trigger a sudden shift from forced joviality to visible irritation. This volatility, said one former staffer, made people constantly hover around him, trying desperately to anticipate the next potential flare-up. To understand how Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor evolved into the man described by insiders, staff members, and former acquaintances, we need to examine the structure that shaped him from childhood. Not the scandals that came later, not the headlines, but the environment that nurtured his worldview from the beginning. The behavior that appeared in private parties and social gatherings did not materialize from nowhere. According to those who observed him across multiple decades, it was the inevitable product of a system that rewarded charm, indulged excess, and systematically shielded weakness. Those close to the royal household have long maintained that Andrew was the most indulged of Queen Elizabeth's children. Insiders who served during his upbringing describe a very specific dynamic that differed from his siblings. While his siblings absorbed varying degrees of responsibility from early ages, Andrew was surrounded by what one source called a soft cushion of admiration. A former palace aide, now retired, stated bluntly that he was the favorite child, and he behaved like someone who knew he was the favorite. According to this aide, gentle correction was often withheld because staff feared upsetting him and feared even more upsetting the Queen herself. That hesitation, repeated day after day, year after year, carved a behavioral pattern that remained long into adulthood. Experts in royal family dynamics call this the spares paradox. You are born into unimaginable privilege, but without a clearly defined constitutional purpose. You receive all the trappings of royalty, yet none of the direct responsibility that comes with being heir. And if the heir carries the burden of expectation, the spare carries an emptiness that can easily fill with entitlement and resentment. The contrast could not be sharper between father and daughters. While Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor moved through life insulated by privilege and unchallenged impulses, his daughters Beatrice and Eugenie grew into adults widely regarded as measured, thoughtful, and quietly responsible. Beatrice and Eugenie have long been described by insiders as polite, steady, and unusually self-aware for women raised in such a high-pressure environment. According to one royal aide who interacted with them during their teenage years, they understood early that the rules were different for them. They couldn't afford mistakes, not with the scrutiny their father generated. This awareness, insiders say, shaped their personalities in ways that distinguish them sharply from both Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. What strikes observers most is that neither princess seemed to inherit Andrew's entitlement. Instead, they developed what several analysts called the reflex of overcorrection, a tendency to behave cautiously, maintain strong boundaries, and project stability. That's it for today, folks. See you in the next video.